Over a lifetime, where do you want to go? Or more specifically, who do you want to become? The fact is we are all on one pathway or another, and each pathway leads to a destination. Over the last month, we've explored what it looks like to move forward on a lifelong discipleship journey. We've talked about the exciting start of this journey, the valleys, maturity, but today we'll look at the destination, to become more and more of the person Christ would be if he were us, to become full of love.
As we mentioned, we're in this last week of the Pathway series, and we're going to be looking at the topic of love today. And to do that, we're going to be in John chapter 13. We'll be reading the first 10 verses of John chapter 13, and then going to verses 34 and 35, jumping ahead a little bit. So it'll be on the screen, but also if you have a Bible, go ahead and open it up so you can follow around or along. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. And Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands, my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath only need to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." And jumping ahead to verses 34 and 35. "A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Well, Candace and I, my wife, we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. I know. Marvel at us. And if you have happened to celebrate more anniversaries, you know what? I'm just not that interested because 20's coming up and we're reveling in it. In fact, typically, at anniversaries, we kind of celebrate them kind of quaintly. It's like we'll go to the kind of the cool kid high-end pizza shop, and go to the theaters rather than ordering cheap pizza and watching a show on our couch. Like that's kind of typically how we celebrate our anniversaries. I don't know if you can relate. Sometimes we'll do something, along the lines of try to summarize each year of our wedding or our life together with a one word and explain why we have that word as our summary. But that's kind of what we do for our wedding anniversaries. So hopefully I set the bar low enough for you guys so you feel pretty good about yourselves. But the 5-year intervals, we do those up a little bit more. But this year, we're going for it. We're swinging big. We're swinging big, you guys. We booked a flight to Paris. I know. Paris, Arkansas. Supposed to be really nice this time of year. No, the real Paris. We found some cheap flights. A friend of a friend has a guest house they're letting us use. We kind of pieced it together and we are making it work. But as you can imagine, we are having to do certain things right now, in the present, to prepare for that destination in the future. The first thing on our mind was kids. We have to do something with our kids. Seems obvious, but it's complex how you try to figure one out. We got a solution, so don't worry. We don't need you to babysit our children. This is not a veiled plea for help. We have it taken care of, but it was a bit of a process. But then there's other things like, Someone wisely said, Bryan, don't just go there to the Louvre and expect them to say, okay, we've been waiting for you. So glad you're here. You have to buy the tickets in advance. This was a lesson for me. I'm like, oh, I have to buy tickets. We have to arrange our schedule. We have to think about transportation. We have to Google best restaurants in Paris and then quickly add best restaurants in Paris on a budget to that Google search. We have to do all of this kind of stuff. And then there's just the imagination, of just imagining what it will be like. And I'm sure, you guys, it'll be 80 degrees somehow in November in Paris. And there will not be a rain cloud in the sky. And somehow all the leaves will still be on the trees. It'll be amazing. I'm sure of it. I'm absolutely sure of it. I'm imagining this thing in the present of what will happen there a few weeks off in the future. Our present right now is charged with what the future asks of us. And if we want to go where we want to go, it involves where we are right now and what we do with our time, what we do with our mind, what we do with our energy in the moment that we are right now. The future and the present are connected to each other, not just for a trip on your anniversary at some point in your life, but the destination that you want to go on depends on what you do with your time right now. That's what this whole pathway teaching series has been about, is naming and all the stages that show up on our life of discipleship, beginning with the fun and passionate beginnings of a life of discipleship to Jesus, interested and engaging, and all of the fire and excitement that begins at those early stages, and then the eventual angst and humility, the tense and challenging moments in the middle, moving towards this stage of love. Now, some of you I know already have been marked by this stage of love, and I just would say for all of us, no matter where we're at, there is more. There's farther. There's deeper. There's still room to be growing into this identity of love towards others, love towards our neighbors, love towards our family, love towards our coworkers. There's still always more. And how we get to that more depends on our now. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be asking the question, we're going to be wrestling with how do we plot our way forward so that we can be marked more and more by the love of God. You could say that every human being asks a similar question. Becoming, where are we going? How do we get there? And I would say, as we are created by God, the ultimate question that everyone is asking underneath it is, how do we become more and more like the one who made us? So we're going to be looking at 3 different characters in the passage we read that will help us all in a different way find our way forward so that we as individuals and as a community here at Anchor can be marked by love and to know what we need to do now so that we can go there throughout the rest of our life. The first person that we're looking at in the scripture we read today is, you guessed it, the Sunday school answer, Jesus. Begins where the passage begins. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew the hour had come for him to leave this world and go with the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon the Iscariot. It's a bummer to be mentioned as like Simon of son of Iscariot. Simon of Iscariot. He's like, dude, that was my son Judas. That wasn't me. Don't put me in the story. The devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon the Iscariot, to betray Jesus. This is like a tense situation for Jesus. Jesus is looking around and he's seeing at the table Judas, the one who's activating his betrayal and is really ultimately the source of his crucifixion. You think your Thanksgiving extended family dinners are tense? Try this one on for size. The one who's like the reason for your death is sitting at the table with you. You think, your blood pressure goes up a little bit when that weird uncle is asking that one question, Think again on the levels here. I don't know about you, but what happens when you find yourself in a tense moment, tension in the muscles like shoulder and neck, back muscles become tight, sweating. Anybody sweat when they're anxious? Remember this movie? Fatigue, long periods of exposure to stress, it makes us tired. Headaches and migraines, irritability or anger, restlessness, difficulty concentrating, negative thinking, forgetfulness, overeating or undereating, increased use of substances, procrastination, disrupted sleep patterns, nail biting, pacing or fidgeting, overworking. These are the things that show up in times of high stress, and it needs to be understood. We need to understand that right here at the Last Supper, it wasn't this quaint, serene picture. Thank you very much, Leonardo da Vinci. It was tense because Jesus knew. He knew. I'm trying to think, as I was preparing for this, I'm trying to think about some of the most tense seasons of my life. Maybe you can think of one for your life. I think some of them are like when our family moved to Tacoma to plant Anchor, and there was a whole lot of uncertainty. I remember a mentor said, hey, it's going to feel like you're walking on a tightrope, and if you fall, you die, but somebody's going to be there to catch you, I promise. And I'm like, thanks a lot, I guess. You're meeting with all these people that are asking all these questions that you don't quite know all the answers to, and you're trying to, and I remember feeling stressed and anxious a lot. Maybe you have a season like that where you have felt stressed or anxious. And one of these descriptors that I just read was maybe something that you felt, the shallow breathing, whatever it was maybe for you. And it's important to note for Jesus, he wasn't immune to all of those natural experiences of stress. It's not like he got son of God card, I'm going to pass on all the normal stuff. We would find in Gethsemane, he actually experiences all the same things we do, which is an interesting comfort, that God in the flesh was not immune to the challenges that you and I face. But still, even then, as the story continues to develop, we see in this moment, as we go on, it says Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. Jesus had this knowledge that allowed him to not only keep his composure, but as we go on, offer love. So in verse 4, it says, so he got up because he had this knowledge of God being with him, of he coming from the Father, going to the Father, because he had this knowledge. So he got up from his meal, took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin, began washing his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. In the midst of an angst-filled moment when anxiety could be winning the day, somehow Jesus offered love. I mean, put yourself there in that situation. In my worst moments, I think I'd be running around with my hair on fire, pointing at people, just saying, you did this, and why isn't this done? And I don't know about, maybe you all would be kind of just happy and fantastic. Jesus loved. Jesus descended, literally, to as far as the earth would let him go. I mean, I don't know if you know this, to wash somebody's feet, you have to get on the floor. It's where the feet are. So Jesus descended low. And I think as John's writing this, he's almost encapsulating Jesus' life in miniature with this description, that the Son of God, who dwelled forever with the Father and the Spirit, was born. He descended into human form, taking on our likeness. And here he descended as low as you could possibly go physically, as low as the earth would take you to wash his disciples' feet, when it would have been natural for him to find a corner and eat just a whole thing of ice cream and neglect and forget about everyone else and massage his own wounds and his own frustrations about how his life was colliding with death too early. But he goes low. It's not just physical descent, but there's this social descent. Maybe you've heard this, that only slaves, or typically slaves, would be the ones that would wash another's feet. Here Jesus is taking on the nature, the likeness, the role of a slave, of a servant. As these feet they're not clean ones, right? You think my feet are a little off. Not mine. I'm not saying you think about mine. Mine are fine. But you think your own. First century, you're walking around, and it's not just dust on your feet, but there's human waste and animal waste. And here Jesus is getting close. Social, physical descent for the purpose of love. For the purpose of love. There is no other figure in history, no religious figure, no noble dignitary that has demonstrated an act like this. You can search through the files and find nothing of comparison. And there, in verses 34 and 35, he calls us to do the same darn thing to everybody else. He says, "A new command I give you." Note command. "Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you're my disciples if you love one another." He keeps on saying love one another, so we can't forget that that's what he commanded us to do. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're hanging out with someone who's like an expert in a field. Maybe they have a hobby they've mastered, or a profession that they kind of are sitting at the highest possible point, at least in your estimation. It could be something just like they can just drain three-pointers all day long, and they're just ability. And all of a sudden you grab the ball and you're like, it goes right over the backboard, or it just somehow goes left when you thought you're aiming this direction, and it just shoots out that way. Like there was a demon in that ball. Something happened, And then you ask them this question, like, how do you do it? And they say, well, it's just simple. And you're just like, it is not simple. I kind of feel a little bit of like, when I look at Jesus in this particular situation, and his situation's rough, and he descends and he loves. I kind of feel like, I'm like, Jesus, how? Okay, you're commanding us to do this. Well, how do we do it? And he gives us the command. He gives us the invitation. He tells us a little bit of like, well, you have to know that you're coming from the Father. You're going to the Father. But still, it feels a little mystifying. We have to find actually more people in the story to help us fill out what it looks like and how we do love one another, how we move towards love. The next figure that pops up is Peter. Peter, numbskull, just like us. We got a couple paintings I'd love to show you. This one's the first, if we can get that up there. Here, it's important to note, Jesus is depicted as having been born on the Scottish Highlands. And there's a sense in which I love this, because every culture throughout history has depicted Jesus as in their own skin color and speaking their own language, which I think is actually, rather than a mischaracterization, it's a picture of the incarnation, that Jesus shows up speaking every language. But here Jesus, Scottish Jesus, with his nice brogue, is washing Peter's feet. But instead of focusing on Jesus, shift to Peter. His hands clasped. He looks like a child being punished. His brow furrowed. Jesus, though, is looking at the feet. He's not dissuaded by Peter's unease. Jesus is there to love. We have another picture. Here, Peter is trying to explain, you could imagine. His hand raised saying, my feet it's just because we went that shortcut. And if I recall, Jesus, you led us down that shortcut, so that's why my feet are so dirty. I'm sorry. But Jesus' eyes are just on the feet. He's just cleaning. He's just expressing love. When Jesus said, hey, I'm going to wash your feet, and if you don't realize what I'm doing, but later you will, Peter said, no, you shall never wash my feet. And in so doing, he's showing what I would guess to be this fear of vulnerability. To be vulnerable means to be woundable. You're putting yourself in a place where somebody could take advantage of you. Somebody could mock you or tease you. Something that can be fearful and fear-inducing. But it's almost like Peter is like saying this, no, don't do it, because he's trying to protect Jesus. He's like, no. No, I don't want you to have to worry about that. Oftentimes we live our lives of discipleship to Jesus. We're afraid to let God just have us. So we keep him kind of at a nice distance, and we keep up our religiosity, because if we keep up our religiosity, it's almost like we can keep God at an appropriate distance. See what I did for you, God? Yeah. But then when Jesus says, hey, if you're going to be one of my disciples, you have to let me wash your feet. And all of a sudden, Peter's like, well then, Lord, we'll take it all. Head, hands, toes, in between the toes, in between the fingers, get there, everywhere. So Peter moves from this fear of vulnerability to spiritual showmanship. I'm going to be the best at being cleaned by Jesus. And Jesus is like, dude, I'm just doing the feet. We're just doing the feet. It's almost like Peter is bouncing back and forth between angst and humility, wrestling with this back and forth, and doesn't know how to just simply rest in the invitation that Jesus is extending to him. I think if we learn about what love looks like from Jesus, if we look about what we're called to from Jesus, we get a glimpse of ourselves in Peter. We oftentimes kind of are nervous about letting our guard down around God. And some of us maybe haven't even said yes to him yet. And we're wondering, is it safe? And we're actually have not said yes, not because we don't believe in God. We believe in God, but I just feel, I don't know. And some of us have walked with Jesus for a long time, but we're staying almost at a distance from him. And if that depicts you, there's an invitation deeper, but you are in good company. You're in company with Peter. And he gives us a picture of where we need to move from if we will be marked by love. The next person I want us to look at is John. John really doesn't show up that much in this passage, but it's his gospel. And he's been showing us his memory of Jesus' words and ways from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 21. But in 13 verse 23, we read this. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Now, does it feel a little funny for John to refer to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved? I remember one professor friend saying to me, he only got away with this because the Gospel of John was the last gospel written. And all the others had died. And so he's coming out with the tell-all memoir. Hey guys, now that they're out of the way, I was the one he really loved. Nobody could answer back because they are with Jesus. It's a funny thought, but I think there's something else at play. John refers to himself towards the end of his gospel 5 times as the disciple that Jesus loved. He was an old man when he wrote this gospel. He was a young man when he was walking with Jesus. Can you imagine as an old man looking back at your younger self, having matured a lot, having grown a lot, and you're looking back at that younger self, and you're not saying, that kid was a numbskull, but you're saying that kid right there, that guy right there, he was the disciple that Jesus loved. I think John gives us a pathway towards being marked by love, because he shows us how he is able to understand himself as the object of Jesus' love. And you cannot become marked by the love of Jesus unless you allow yourself to be the object of his love. It must first come from outside before it comes from inside. But it goes on just in that verse. The disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining next to Jesus. The Greek literally means to relax on the chest. So here, John has his head on the chest of the Messiah, hearing the heartbeat of the Messiah. He is allowing himself to understand himself as the beloved of God. And he is letting his guard down, getting close as possible to hear the very heartbeat of the Messiah. These 2 practices, allowing yourself to be simply loved by God and drawing close to him. It's the opposite of Peter, who on one hand was trying to show how great he is, and on the other hand was trying to protect himself. John does the opposite. He simply draws near to Jesus, and he understands himself as the object of his love. Later on, he would write a letter to a church. It's 1 John, and he couldn't stop talking about love. Throughout his letter, he just kept on talking about love. In fact, he would be known as the apostle of love. History, the church has called him the apostle of love because he just couldn't get love off his tongue. In his gospel, he mentions it in the last half 31 times. Love, love, love. In 1 John, he writes this: we are from God, and whoever knows God listens to us, but whoever is not from God does not listen to us. This is how we recognize the spirit of truth and the spirit of falsehood. Dear friends, let us love one another. Referencing John 13. For love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. And he goes on. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. And whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. We love because he first loved us. And again, there is no fear in love. But perfect love casts out or drives out fear. The picture in the Greek is actually of love gripping a hold of fear and walking it outside and saying, you're not welcome back here again. Kaplunk. Like a bouncer. John wrote this letter when he was staring his own persecution in the face. A few years later, he'd been taken to the island of Patmos to serve nearly the rest of his life in exile because he held on to the confession of faith in Jesus Christ in amidst a Roman culture that said only Caesar gets the high name. And John said, Jesus gets my high name. How does John, stand eye to eye with the most powerful forces of the world and say, bring what you will. I'm not scared. Love does that. Love does that. How do you stand up to the greatest anguish and angst, heartache and pain, the situations where you don't know how everything you need to come together, you don't know how it's going to come together? How do you stand and look at that in the eye? How do you get the power to do that? Can I just tell you, your bank account doesn't have that power. Your intellectual capacities don't have that power. Your beautiful looks don't have that power. All we have will cower in the face of this world's forces and tyrants. It is the one that went low. It is the one that went low so that he might show us what love is, that gives us the power to, with John, look fear right in the face and say, you have no power over me. So I want to, as we step into communion and prayer and worship, I want to invite all of us to do two practices. The first is to imagine yourself. You might close your eyes. That helps. And I'll warn you, there will be some of you will have skeptical thoughts here. Push them away. I want to invite you to imagine yourself, like John, relaxing on the shoulder of Jesus, hearing his heartbeat. Let your guard down to him. For some of you, you may not yet be a follower of Jesus. I would challenge you, let your guard down to him. And there, in that spot, dare to put your hand to your chest and simply say, I am the disciple that Jesus loves. I am the disciple that Jesus loved. I am the disciple that Jesus will love tomorrow. I am the disciple that Jesus will love 10 years from now. I am the disciple that Jesus loved 10 years ago. When you do these two things, when you let your guard down and allow yourself to be the beloved, you set a pathway with John towards being marked by love. When you're ready, don't rush out of this moment. When you're ready, communion is available for you. prayer is available for you. Both of these are accelerants, means of grace to move you towards what Jesus is inviting you to in the future. So Holy Spirit, come over this place. Protect us from our cynical and skeptical thoughts. Let us simply relax on your shoulder and hear your heartbeat pound with love for us.